from the Mercy One studio.
Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
And I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
And we are coming to you live.
Should I use
from
doctor?
I'm not doctor. Are you there?
No, but should I use it? Should I use it?
Oh.
I thought the Wall Street Journal kicked off a conversation about this week. So
I know.
I'm feeling kind of pretentious. I've always said doctor on the show, but it is a humanities degree.
I'm sorry. This is great. Folks, this is live Twitter brainworms, as the kids call it, infecting our show. Dr. Bud Marr called out in national news media about whether he should use the word doctor. I think you're right, Bud. If you start necessitating that you're Dr. Bud Marr, the question is, should I be Master Bo Bonner, as that is the degree that I have? So I don't know if we can solve that. Maybe we have to have an entire show about what we should use out of the loop. But I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm Bo Bonner with Dr. Bud Marr here in the United States of America, where Bud and I both work for Mercy College of Health Sciences. I'm the senior advisor for mission initiatives and spiritual health, and also the director of our new Center for Human Flourishing that we're getting started. Bud, what do you do for the old College of Mercy?
I'm the academic dean at Mercy College, so involved in all things academic there, and a lot of things exciting going on, including the Center for Flourishing.
You know what, Bud? I think that you should just skip all of this Wall Street Journal stuff and just go with asking people to call you Dean Marr just anywhere that you're at. I mean, Quick Trip, the grocery store, football games. When they go like, excuse me, sir, you're like Dean.
Sir, Dr. Dean. No, I don't know. I mean, for a while there, I thought, so there was kind of this denigration of the idea of like meritocracy. So just that, the fact that you're wealthy or successful is because you tried harder than other people. But now things are swinging back, and, well, we better save this conversation for another morning, because you need to prep me on what I can and cannot say on the radio before we talk about meritocracies.
I'll say this, though. If you're getting in trouble for, in all of our advertisements, you're Dr. Bud Marr, and you know who suggested that? Iowa Catholic Radio's own John Leonetti. So, dude, if you get into any trouble over using your your title of doctor, one man's to blame, and his name's John Leonetti. So thanks, John, for putting Bud right in the crosshairs of America's pressing Twitter discussions, which no one on Twitter who's not on Twitter, everyone else is fine, but on Twitter, it's supposedly a big deal.
Well, it's funny because it really has never been that big of a deal for me. Like I feel like I worked fairly hard to finish that degree, but I don't, jump on students if they end up saying Professor Marr or Mr. Marr or whatever. But I do love, for me, it does generate some good humor. I'm sure, I think you may have even posted the meme, Bo, where it's like, there's a guy laying on the ground and he's having a heart attack. Is there a doctor around? And a guy walks up and says, like, I'm a doctor, but it's a philosophy degree. And she says, oh, he's going to die. And then the guy reflectively looks up and says, like, but did he ever live? That's pretty good stuff.
The other one is like I'm a doctor of philosophy, and the gal goes, "Oh, he's going to die," and then the philosopher goes, "We're all going to die," which you're like, yeah, "Thank you, philosopher." It's some good stuff to right out of the gate. Make sure people, again, Bud, we're just here breaking news stories about what's occurring on Twitter.
Well, I guess I'll stick with doctor for now, but if the leadership of the station wants to convene and, just ask me to drop that, I'm willing to go either direction.
Well, I put my credentials up there, which is that famous picture of a grave that says poet, philosopher, failure. So I thought that was pretty good. Look, speaking of the whole people getting worried about doctors, Bud, we're underwritten by Mercy College of Health Sciences, which, folks, I want to tell you, when you think of medicine, a lot of people think of doctors, and God bless them. They do a lot of work. They do a lot of great good. But we want to make sure to, in an unrivaled way, praise nurses and allied health, which Mercy College of Health Sciences is preparing the next wave of people who are answering the call of spreading the ministry of healing throughout our communities. And they do this through our nursing degrees and our allied health degrees, there's so many, there's different ways to do it, different speeds, different delivery modalities. Here in the middle of the pandemic, Bud, it's just heartening to see how many people continue to enroll in our classes because they want to be on the front lines of helping people.
Well, Bo, after that intro, I am going to try to make a serious point, and I hope this comes across coherently. But one thing that's great about Mercy is these jokes that we're making, like, well, did he ever live? Is I feel like at a place like Mercy, we try to re-wed those things. That's a tongue twister. But there's this idea in our culture that someone's bodily existence or their survival is separate from these larger philosophical questions that we might ask. As Catholics, we know that's not the case, that, we're embodied souls, so to speak. And so at a place like Mercy, we try to bring those questions together and say, when we treat someone's physical ailments, what does it mean to care for the entire person? So, it's funny sometimes that our culture will kick off these conversations in ways that end up being less helpful or constructive. But I do feel like when the Wall Street Journal has editorials like that, it gives us an opening to remind people of the truth of our human nature.
Well, we get to remind people more of that truth about embodiedness directly with the person that we have that we're going to talk about today. Carter Snead is the director of the De Nicola Center of Ethics and Culture at Notre Dame. He's written a book, What It Means to Be Human, The Case for the Body in Public Bioethics. And so this idea of embodiment, Bud, right up our alley. So this is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back with Carter Snead right after this. Folks, if you have questions for The Uncommon Good, if you want to weigh in on whether Bud should call himself Dr. Marr, Dean Marr, whether he should go by Bud or Ryan, that's a new thing. Everybody's deciding about whether they should call Bud or that or not. You can tell us by using the Zip Whip line. 515-223-1150, 515-223-1150, the Zip Whip line. Your straight line of capacity to let us know how you feel about these pressing, rather dumb Twitter issues. The Zip Whip line. 515-223-1150, 515-223-1150, hashtag UCG for The Uncommon Good. We'd love to hear from you. Just let us know your thoughts. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Dean Bud Marr. We'll be back with The Uncommon Good after this.
Need an experienced attorney for legal matters? I know a guy. Stephen C. Reed, attorney at law, is a proud supporter of Iowa Catholic Radio. Steve is a longtime resident of Iowa and is licensed to practice in all Iowa state and federal courts. He has years of experience in real estate law, wills, conservatorships, trusts, and estate planning. Steve's law office phone number is 515-224-1776. That's 515-224-1776.
Thank you, Blessman International, for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio. Everyone lives their life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. How we use that time directly affects if our life will leave a significant impact or not. Each year, Blessman International leads Central Iowans on a 12-day, all-inclusive experience sharing the heart of Christ with children in South Africa. Teams are forming to do something significant in an African child's life. Learn more at blessmaninternational.org. That's blessmaninternational.org. Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Storm Alert Weather is provided by Divine Treasures. Divine Treasures is a Catholic book and gift store serving the Des Moines community for over 25 years. Their mission is to help Catholics know, love, and keep their faith in our Lord Jesus Christ and His Church. Divine Treasures is where you can find great Catholic books, beautiful Bibles, rosaries, jewelry, statues, and religious gifts for those memorable events in your life. Divine Treasures, 5701 Hickman Road, Des Moines, 515-255-5230. Thank you to Divine Treasures for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Hi, this is Father John Ricardo, and I want to thank Caldwell Parish Funeral Home and Crematory for underwriting Christ is the Answer. Losing a loved one, as we know, is never easy, and it can leave you feeling lost and even hopeless at times. But Caldwell Parish helps ease that burden by sincerely caring both about your loss and about your faith. Caldwell Parish Funeral Home and Crematory is Des Moines' only Catholic-owned and operated funeral home. Their number is 515-276-0551 or online at caldwellparish.com.
We're back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for tuning in. We love having you on, listening to the show. And so, again, thank you for joining us. Today, we have a very special guest, O. Carter Snead, director of the De Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture and a professor of law and concurrent professor of political science at Notre Dame. He has a new book that I would recommend strongly to all of you, What It Means to Be Human, The Case for the Body in Public Bioethics. Carter, thank you for joining the show.
Oh, great to join you. Thanks for having me on.
So, Bud and I were talking at the top of the hour that the sort of host of concerns that we try to bring to the fore at Mercy College, we kind of think maybe you've been spying on our lives and then wrote a book about it, because literally everything that your book is about is things that we have been pressing for our students. It's easy when you're at a place like a health science college that is dedicated to nursing and allied health to focus on the body as a sort of medical entity on its own, divorced completely from who I am, what are my wants and goals, what does it mean for me to flourish. And you talk about this in your book, right, about how the idea of an expressive individualism, that I am the choices I make, inevitably lead to a sort of dualistic understanding of the human, that there's who I am and what I want, and then there's sort of like this rusty cage that I have to use to get these things. So for folks who might go, oh my goodness, this, a book, like what does it mean to be human? Why is it that the body came to your mind as something that we have to reclaim, to talk about in public?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And the story of this book and the sort of thesis of the book emerges really from my experience stretching back years ago when I was the general counsel to President Bush's Council on Bioethics. And we were grappling with a lot of complicated questions, ethical and public policy issues arising from advances in biomedical science and biotechnology. We were working on issues like cloning and assisted reproduction and embryo research and end-of-life decision-making and other kinds of issues as well. And the thing that I and my colleagues noticed is that the law, and I'm a law professor, as you said, the law frequently fails to protect the weakest and most vulnerable among us in these categories. The elderly, disabled folks, children. Frequently, and the story of bioethics in some ways is a story of reacting against exploitation of the vulnerable. And the question is, well, why do we persistently fail in this regard? And I sort of, looking at the question deeply, came to the realization that the problem is the vision of the human person and human flourishing that's at the core of our law and policy. And a lot of your listeners might say, well, what does the view of human identity and human flourishing have to do with law? Isn't law just doctrine and rules and things? And we shouldn't talk about thick concepts like morality and justice. But the truth is that law itself and public policy all exist for the sake of protecting and promoting the flourishing of persons. And for the law to get that question right, to get its ultimate purpose right, it has to operate from some kind of an assumption about what a person is and what constitutes human flourishing. Otherwise, it's arbitrary and capricious at best. And so what I undertook to do in the book was to drill down into these vital conflicts of American public bioethics and ask the question of what vision of human personhood and flourishing is animating these laws. What is orienting the laws? And what I found was that the vision of the person and flourishing is exactly what you just described, this dualistic account of a person really reduced to his or her mind or will, defined by her desires, his or her capacities to formulate future-directed plans and pursue them, in an instrumental way, using their relationships with other people, the natural world, and their bodies themselves as mere instruments to the realization of the projects of the will. But as you all know very well, that the human person is more than just a will. In fact, a lot of people are not capable of exercising cognition in the ways that expressive individualism defines human flourishing, and those people are therefore invisible to the law and policy that's meant to protect all of us. And the reason the body is important is because the body is an intrinsic part, an integrated part of who we are. We're not simply minds, we're not simply atomized wills, but if we think about our lives, our individual and shared lives, we recognize that the body is essential to who we are. And to forget about the body, as Alistair McIntyre says, is to miss something essential to what it means to be a human being. And so in order to fix the injustices and the misguided laws and policies, we have to remember the body and recall that being our embodiment and what it means, namely our vulnerability, our mutual dependence, and our subjection to natural limits, are all part of what it means to be a human being.
Yeah, Carter, in this article that you have for Church Life Journal, you helpfully point out the way that the idea of dependence has been just an essential concept in Catholic anthropology, Christian philosophy. And I'm wondering if you could say more about that, about the ways that our culture tries to bracket dependence or forget about it, and what it might mean for Catholic ethicists and philosophers to recover a robust concept of our dependence and what that means for how we organize our social life.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So because we live as corruptible bodies in time, and that's essential to who we are all unavoidably dependent upon one another. Now, everybody sees that immediately when you think about a newborn, or you think about someone who is nearing the end of his or her life, or you think about someone who has a disability. But as Alistair McIntyre points out, that everybody exists on a scale of disability. Everyone is dependent upon the beneficence of others, sometimes for their basic survival, sometimes to learn the habits and virtues that we need to be successful people and to be flourishing people. And but as you say, especially in American culture, this notion of dependence is either ignored or seen as something that is hateful or highly problematic, and therefore to be disdained. But in fact, being vulnerable and being dependent is part of who we are. And once you recognize that and realize that that's an essential feature of what it means to be a human being, it awakens in you, I think, a sense of gratitude for those who have sustained us, both in a literal sense, sustained our lives when we couldn't take care of ourselves, but also sustained us in terms of even developing our sense of personal identity through the give and take of the dialogical relationship that we have. And we come to understand who we are embedded in relationships to other people and traditions and families and civilizations. And sometimes we define ourselves in opposition to these, but it's still it's still relative to those baselines of stories that we didn't author, that we find ourselves part of. And once you realize that, you say, okay, well, I owe a debt of gratitude to those who took care of me. And the fitting response to gratitude is the generosity to extend that kind of care and concern to others. And it also should inspire in us the idea of humility. It should inspire in us the willingness to tolerate imperfection, to be open to the unbidden, to recognize solidarity, to recognize the intrinsic equal dignity of every human being. And so I think recognizing dependence as an essential feature of the human condition, again, makes one alive to the obligations we have to others, as well as the claims that we can make on others that we didn't earn and that we didn't agree to.
Carter, this is all very timely. One of the things that we haven't even made like the big official announcement, but like it's in the works is here at Mercy, we're starting a Center for Human Flourishing. And so it's timely
Oh, wow.
to have you on talking exactly about this because, in one way, it's very heartening to hear people all over really talking about this concept. You see it. It's not just Aristotelians, Thomists, Catholics. Harvard has a program in human flourishing. There's I think it's one of the nursing boards, and I don't know if it's the United States one, it might be the British one. One of their sort of signposts about like how well their programs are doing is, does it promote human flourishing? There's this impulse to talk about, if we're going to talk about human happiness, it needs to be more holistic. People kind of throw out those sort of words as too. It's not just, is your body doing good? These things like this. But it's interesting because when you get down to the basics of this, people might go like, well, who doesn't want to flourish? And isn't human flourishing just a fancy way to talk about happiness? And who doesn't want to be happy? Are you guys just, talking about stuff that doesn't need to be talked about? But the fact of the matter is, what you think counts as flourishing has seismic import about how you measure your life. And this has become only absolutely 100% clear in 2020, where we've all had to drastically alter our lives. And you've heard people talk frighteningly that, like, if something like the lockdown continued, they can't imagine flourishing. And then you hear older people go, well, if I became a burden on other people, I would rather die, because how could I flourish if I'm a burden on other people? These have the talk about what we mean to flourish has immediate outsized impacts about whether people know how to measure the measure of their lives well. And I wonder if you start to see that, right? That the importance of this book, I mean, it's flying off the shelves, that the importance of this book and the question it asks is precisely because people have got to this difficult point where they realize if we don't get flourishing and happiness right, we're going to get a lot of other things wrong about understanding ourselves as human.
No, I couldn't agree more. And if one's definition of flourishing is narrowly defined as being able to pursue the goods of expressive individualism, that is to interrogate the interior of your own inner depths of your consciousness and finding your originality and authenticity, and then projecting that into the world by expressing it and then configuring your life to pursue it. If that's your vision of human flourishing, it's a pretty narrow sliver of the human population that's capable of that, right? And everybody else, as you say, who would measure their own success, their own happiness, their own flourishing, they'd realize, well, I fall short because I have a cognitive disability, or because I'm old, or because I'm poor, or because I'm part of a discrete insular minority. I don't have the kind of freedom to impose my unencumbered will on the universe. That's not, and the other alternative, of course, is to measure people's value just in a narrowly and in a cold-blooded, rational way by their productivity, right? Like to say, well, we have a kind of utilitarian calculus for what makes a person valuable. And these are all, I mean, they all capture something important that's true, right? We are free, we are particular, there is value in introspection and originality, there's value in being productive, but that's not the end-all and be-all of what it means to flourish as a human being. It's possible, I think, and I argue in the book, to flourish as a human being even merely as the passive recipient of unconditional love. A person who is not capable even of formulating a thought because they have a cognitive impairment, or because they're a baby in the womb, or because they're an elderly person suffering from dementia, doesn't mean that they can't flourish as a human being, because our concept of what it means to succeed and to flourish is to participate in love and friendship, even as a merely passive recipient of unconditional love and care.
Yeah, Carter, I was, with this next question, I think it's related to what you've already said regarding dependence in some ways, but I'm just thinking about times in class at Mercy where I've broached some of these, hot button ethical issues. And this is purely anecdotal, but for myself, I feel like some of the undergrads have been more open to wrestling with pro-life questions when we were dealing with the beginning of life. But I've almost found it more difficult to talk about the end of life. And the difference seems to be, at the beginning of life, like sometimes the students can recognize, like, oh, we have a human being here, and if we intervene, like, they can grow and flourish, they can live a meaningful existence. At the end of life, the snag seems to be that students have a difficult time conceptualizing any meaning to suffering. So if the rest of a person's life involves just, suffering that's difficult to alleviate in many ways, then, we're in a sense like doing something merciful by ending their life early. Do you have any thoughts about, could you say some things about the role of suffering?
So
in
it's not surprising. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. It's not surprising that young people at the height of their health and energy and levels of activity have a hard time imagining the value of a life characterized by diminished functioning and decline because of a person is nearing the end of their life. There's a lot of social science evidence that shows that we're terrible at predicting how we would react to a condition of diminished physical functioning due to disability or to just senescence. And I mean, it's Carl Schneider and Amy Fagerlin. I mentioned their study in the book, and it's all about the living will and the failure of the living will, in part because we're just really bad at predicting how we respond to things. And you don't know the value you derive from your own existence and the value others derive from your existence until you're actually in that condition. And so I find with young people in these situations, it's valuable to try to help cultivate their moral imagination, to help cultivate their understanding of the other through narrative and stories. And, think about your grandparents, think about your cousin who is disabled, think about people who have diminished lives and ask yourself, are they happy? And in many cases, they are. And do you value this person? Do you love this person? Would you feel like there was a loss if this person ceased to exist? And most people have folks in their life, I hope at least people have in their lives, examples of loved ones that they're close to. And if they're not, they're interesting stories that one can share. I mean, to try to enliven and expand their moral imagination, to see that. It's really, Helen Keller. I mean, there's all kinds of people who are manifestly happy and valuable, despite the fact that they have these diminished capacity for functioning. Although we do want to avoid the idea that, like, taking the extraordinary story of someone who against all odds, ran a marathon with no legs or whatever, like that's not the measure of a person's success. That would be a kind of backdoor way into the trap of expressive individualism. I think, stories about Mother Theresa, stories about people who cared for others, just held them, accompanied them in their suffering. The virtue of misericordia, a person that you can't, especially for healthcare providers, a person that you can't save or cure, just the good of accompanying them in their suffering. And then if you want to zoom out to the world of law and public policy, one of the, I think, potent lines of explanation to students who are young to say, well, look, and I'm a lawyer, obviously I live in the world of law and public policy. If you were to adopt a rule that allowed, people to end their own lives or to hasten their own deaths, as an option on the table, this has downstream policy consequences for the weakest and most vulnerable, the disabled, the elderly, the poor, certain disfavored minorities, to where they're going to be subject to fraud, abuse, coercion, duress in ways that are deeply, deeply worrisome to people who care about justice and care about the unfortunate and the vulnerable.
No, Carter, we're coming up on the break. This is all fantastic stuff. I always think about it in these terms when I hear people go, well, I don't want to be a burden. Like, my goal is to be a burden. I mean, I'm frankly where, like, if they're going to carry my casket at this weight, it's going to be a burden. And I think that there's a way of where you go, I'm not going to let you take me out easy. And that's what I always tell my Okie relatives.
There's a terrific essay by Gil Meilander, who's a wonderful Christian ethicist Lutheran, the most interesting person who writes in bioethics, in my opinion, who wrote a piece called I Want to Be a Burden to My Children. And it's a very funny but very deep essay.
And so I think that, like, that's something to further tell, like you said, young people is, it's like you said, if you live in the world of YOLO or killing it or whatever the kids are saying now, the idea is, do you have memories that you can sort of throw out to everyone? But in the end, right, it's like you said, that we don't have the ability to predict the small treasures of human interaction that we ourselves never choose. And if you think that life is a menu and you're choosing the items and eventually you'll run out of menu items, I can see where you get that way. But having children, which is something we'll talk about because you make such a great point of it when we get back from the break, can disabuse you of a lot of this idea about the idea of you choosing how you're going to live your life. So this is The Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. We have Carter Snead, the director of the De Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture and the author of What It Means to Be Human, The Case for the Body in Public Bioethics. Stick around. We'll be back talking more with Carter right after this. Folks, if you want to keep up with what we're doing here at Iowa Catholic Radio, it's easy to do. All you need to do is follow our social media accounts. You can go to the old school original social media site, which is just the plain old website first, www.iowacatholicradio.com. You can listen live to the radio station. You can donate. You can sign up for email alerts, everything like that. You can even see host faces if you really, really, really think you need to. You can also go to Facebook and look at iowacatholicradio.com, find our page and friend us, and then you can see our posts. You can go to Twitter at IA Catholic Radio. Follow us and you can see our tweets and read them. Maybe you can get in fights about whether people should call themselves doctor or not. Who knows? Twitter always is a grab bag of tricks. And finally, you can go download the Iowa Catholic Radio app, and anywhere that you have a data connection, you can listen live, listen to our other music channels, listen to our prayers in multiple languages, and also donate and sign up for things there as well. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back right after this.
Thank you, Construction Professionals, for your support of Dowling Catholic Sports 365. Construction Professionals is a family-owned business dedicated to our customers. Whether designing, building, or renovating, we are here to better serve you. Our passion for quality craftsmanship, paired with our dedication to creativity, result in a home that reflects your personality, style, and family function. Construction Professionals. Design, build, renovate. CPCustomHomes.com. From our family to yours. God bless.
Thank you, Farm Bureau agent Cindy Schulte, for underwriting Catholic Women Now. As an authorized independent agent, Cindy's team can provide health insurance options from Wellmark Blue Cross Blue Shield of Iowa. Cindy Schulte at 1315 50th Street in West Des Moines or on the web at cindyschulte.com. 515-226-2111. Cindy and her team know health insurance.
Wellmark Blue Cross Blue Shield of Iowa is an independent licensee of the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. Products available at Farm Bureau Financial Services.
We typically get sick more often as we age, right? This makes finding the right insurance plan very important. Give the good folks at Catholic United Financial a call. They're on a mission to give Catholics straight talk and great rates on Medicare supplement insurance, the backup insurance to Medicare.
Hi, this is Kevin Williams, your local Catholic United specialist, and I'm here to help you. Please call me at 224-764-2997.
Get a quote from Kevin Williams at 1-800-255-9817.
Here's your forecast on Iowa Catholic Radio. A little bit of sunshine coming back today with high pressure moving into our area. Still chilly with our high in the mid to upper 20s. Down to 15 and turning cloudy overnight. A lot more sunshine coming our way tomorrow, and we'll hit 30. We're back in the low 40s and partly cloudy on Friday. The weather is brought to you by Divine Treasures, a Catholic book and gift store serving the Des Moines community for over 25 years. I'm meteorologist Steve Hamilton on Iowa Catholic Radio.
Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for coming back and listening to the show. We have as our guest O. Carter Snead, director of the De Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture, professor of law and concurrent professor of political science at Notre Dame. His new book, What It Means to Be Human, The Case for the Body in Public Bioethics, is a book you should make sure to go find, but also is the subject of what we're talking about today. Carter, thank you for coming on the show.
Great to be with you guys.
So we had a very thorough discussion in the first half of the show exactly about things like embodiedness, dependence, what this starts to look like when we talk about human flourishing in the sort of public square. We left off with the idea that there's a way in which if young people might have difficulty understanding some of this idea that dependence is actually a good, and it's hard to imagine what you would do at the end of your life when maybe you have diminished capacities. You make the point that being a parent, and not necessarily, we should put it this way, you're not saying that only parents can understand this, but in a world where parenting has a central sort of role in how communities organize themselves, that a world with children teaches us something about gratitude and givenness and embodiedness and dependence that maybe, like you said, when we're 18 or 20, we might not quite understand. If you don't mind starting off the second half of the show talking about this, I think it's a fantastic point that you bring up here.
Thanks. So as embodied beings, people who are corruptible bodies in time, we depend on what Alistair McIntyre calls networks of uncalculated giving and graceful receiving. Networks made up of people who are willing to make the good of another person their own good without any hope of getting anything in return, without a contract, without a transaction, without some kind of ROI in mind. And the sort of paradigm of that relationship is the relationship of parent and child, right? A mom or a dad doesn't take care of a child because they have a contract to do it. They don't take care of a child because they're hoping to get something in return for it. They take care of a child because that's what it means to be a parent. That's what the nature of that relationship. And the child is utterly dependent for basic survival, but also to learn all of the goods and habits and virtues and practices that a child needs to learn to become a mature grown-up. And so we depend on these networks for our survival, but we also depend on these networks to learn to become the thing that we're supposed to be, which is to say someone who is capable of making the good of another person their own good. And of course, it's not just parents that are able to do this or to participate in these relationships. Mother Theresa, for example, did this in a way that exceeds anything that I'll ever be able to do in my entire life. And she wasn't a parent in the biological sense. But for me, and this sort of speaking on my own experience, I would be a horrible person, first of all, if I weren't married, right? because sort of learning to live with another person and making that person's good your own good takes you outside of yourself, and it requires you to be less selfish, to be less self-involved. And then having children, it was another thing that made me into a less terrible person as well. That's not to say that I'm a good person, but that's to say that the idea of seeing the world through the lens of parenthood makes me think about every encounter that I have with every person through that lens. This is somebody's parent, this is somebody's child, and there are certain kinds of there's a certain kind of meaning to that. And I think that in a world without children, and insofar as there are nations, including our own, that appear to be having less and less children, that worries me a lot because there's a natural sort of pedagogical function, human pedagogical function to being a parent. And when you're a child, you're less aware except in retrospect as to what the sort of meaning of that experience of being a child is. And maybe when you actually come to take care of your own parents at the end of their lives, or when they become dependent, you start to see, what the full arc and the meaning of that relationship was. But I think parenthood is a human experience that everybody can understand. That is a perfect example of what I mean when I say networks of uncalculated giving and graceful receiving that are essential for the survival of the human species, but also essential for teaching us all what it is that we're supposed to be as human beings.
Now, Carter, I know your wife. She's a fantastic person, so you can't be that terrible if she decided to say yes to you, buddy. The other thing, you're talking about the contract. If you could do a contract with kids, my fifth kid, who's just about to turn 2, we need to renegotiate that contract when it comes about sleep patterns, because I would certainly write the contract different than the one she has in mind. But no, I think that's absolutely right to think about this. It would be sort of just ludicrous to think about talking about your children in a contractual way. And that's that's how we all got here, right? Is a family and parenthood and childhood. So, no, I think that is exactly something you have to lay on people's plate sometimes to show how ridiculous it would be to order the entire rest of the world a certain way that would make very little sense at this primary way where we all began.
Well, and as healthcare, as teachers and leaders in the context of healthcare, the amazing thing is that the law and policy of assisted reproductive technologies is built around a presupposition that what children are is a way of parents realizing their own dreams and aspirations. And that's not what parents want. That's not what people want when they go to seek, when they're seeking to become parents, when they're seeking medical care and becoming parents. They're not seeking to impose their unencumbered will through parenthood. What they're seeking, they want a child that they can love and welcome unconditionally. But the law, the public policy, if you were to look at the landscape of American law and policy relating to assisted reproductive technologies, what you would infer is, well, this is designed for persons to pursue their own self-expression through reproduction. There are no guardrails. There are no limits. We have 90% of clinics in the United States practice sex selection, offer sex selection as an adjunct to IVF. There are companies that will sell batches of living human embryos, embryonic human beings, to meet the desires and needs of consumers. We have the practice of gestational surrogacy that looks like it's a form of manufacture subject to quality assurance, where gestational surrogates are treated like machines, basically. And again, that's the presuppositions, this sort of, I call the anthropological presuppositions on which the law is built, or in this case, the absence of law is built. And it is completely divergent from what patients in the fertility context are looking for, want, or need. They want guardrails. They want to be protected even from their own temptations to do things that are not in their best interest, in the best interest of their children.
Yeah, Carter, I hope this next question isn't too much out of left field, but just pivoting a little bit. I was wondering if you could speak to somehow, it seems to me that this year, the struggles that we've gone through as a country with the pandemic and the country's response to that have kind of shone a light on the limitations of our social imaginary. And it gets back some to this anthropology of expressive individualism that you diagnose. But it feels to me that in many ways, the experience of COVID has really exposed, some of the poorer ways we think about healthcare, but at the very least, this idea of the common good, that, there's no idea of like freedom or liberty or flourishing that does operate in a purely individualistic manner. The good is enhanced to the extent that each one of us benefits from the way that we organize our social existence. But what has this year been like, even at your own center, and as you guys have tried to speak to some of the crises and struggles that we've gone through as a country?
Yeah, so at Notre Dame, we've tried to balance all the different goods that are in tension with one another when a global pandemic like this one arises. We made the decision at the beginning of the year that we would return to in-person instruction in the fall, because we thought that was important for the flourishing of our students and for our university and our community of learning, that being together mattered and was important for our mutual flourishing as individuals and as a community. But we also, in doing that, had to take on some pretty onerous restrictions and burdens involving mask wearing and social distancing and other testing, contact tracing and all that. Things that were tough, they were tough and they required, and we, being human, stumbled and got back on our feet a couple times. But it was overall, I think, a success. But what it reflects is it's hard to hold all these things together sometimes, because there is people are suspicious that certain kinds of that certain lockdowns aren't warranted because of the public, the epidemiology or the science or the public health considerations. And on the other hand, you have people who are there are extremes from all angles on this thing. And I think we did a good job at Notre Dame of trying to balance all those different dimensions, because, as you say, one of the things about this pandemic is that because, at least, I'm not an expert, but because there are especially vulnerable populations to COVID who are quite endangered by it. And then there are large populations, college-age kids and so forth, younger kids that are not as endangered by it. It really does present a kind of serious question about how do we take care of each other, and asking people who are not as vulnerable to take to restrict their own freedom, to restrict their own behavior in a way that meant to take care of those of us who are less vulnerable. And the truth, and we're seeing that now with vaccine allocation as well. I mean, how do we allocate the vaccines to the most vulnerable communities? And again, I think the way of thinking about this is through the question of, what we do is a function of who we are, right? Who are we, and what do we owe to each other? And if we take seriously our identity as embodied beings, that means that we stand in a certain kind of relation to one another, and we have certain obligations to each other. And sometimes those obligations require us to restrict our own freedom in the name of caring for more vulnerable people. And I think that the pandemic has, as you say, surfaced that and brought it to light. And I hope that we learn from it and we recognize it.
Well, Carter, we have about 5 more minutes left, and this has been it's just been a treat to talk about these issues. Like I said, I can't recommend your book enough for people to go get started thinking about them. I guess the last thing that comes to mind is, so when you think about an expressive individualism, and as you said, there's all sorts of philosophical, theological problems with it. But even on a sort of sociological level, you ask yourself, well, why do people press this flawed understanding of the human? There's all sorts of reasons, but one that I think comes to mind, like let's just take the last 2 things we talked about, reproductive technologies and the COVID crisis. If we're all disparate, atomized individuals with our own little concerns, it's really easy to take advantage of us, at least economically, if not more. To me, this is the crux of where Catholic social thought doesn't find a good home with either party, with most of the economic theories, because what it comes down to is if we only just have our individual desires, we will be susceptible to market and social forces and just be obliterated by them. And it's like you said, so now you can sell human embryos, and we don't see that as akin to slavery. You can look at a worldwide pandemic and do what you want in many ways because individuals have no capacity to understand the dependence and interdependence that a different understanding of human flourishing gives us. It's funny enough, if we don't recognize our weakness and dependence, we make ourselves weaker to forces outside of ourselves because we stand alone rather than together. And I guess, like with the short time left, if that's what you start to see the future holding if we don't get this issue right.
Yeah. Now, this is the paradox. This is the paradox that Tocqueville saw. This is the paradox that Robert Bellah saw. This is the paradox that Solzhenitsyn saw. The idea that because it's inhuman to try to configure life according to the principles of expressive individualism, because that's not actually, it's just not possible to do it, right? It's too disorienting. We don't live on blank slates. As McIntyre says, human beings are storytelling animals. If you don't have a narrative, if you don't know what stories you're a part of, which invariably involve other people and our relationships to them, you really don't know what to do. It's disorienting. You can't even do the thing that expressive individualism asks you, which is to define yourself and according to your originality and your authenticity, and to project that into the universe, because doing that, defining yourself, requires measuring yourself against other people in the dialogical relationships that we have with others. And if you're disoriented and alienated and alone and you can't make sense of anything, you are all of a sudden vulnerable and susceptible to totalitarianism. You're susceptible to despotism. You're just susceptible to, as you say, just getting crushed by the market. I mean, there's all kinds of, you're alone, and so you have to join somebody. And this, in a funny way, I think illustrates the kind of rise of extreme identity politics among populations that you would imagine embrace an anthropology of expressive individualism. You have to find a way how you identify. You have to join somebody. You have to serve somebody. because because that's what human beings are. And if you weaken the ties to family, if you weaken the ties to civil society, you weaken the ties to community through the sort of acid of expressive individualism, you are a sitting duck, and that's a very dangerous situation.
Well, Carter, this has been, like we said, a fantastic, timely episode. It's been great to have you on. Just with the little bit of time we have left. Of course, plug your book, but if you don't mind plugging what your center does as well, I've had the wonderful opportunity to go out there and give a talk with one of the big November conferences. Of course, we didn't get to do it this year, but if you don't mind just plugging what you guys do there, it's such a wonderful institution. I'd love to let other people know where they can go find some
thank you for the opportunity.
Stuff.
Yeah, the De Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture at the University of Notre Dame is an interdisciplinary center at the university. We do research and programming. Of course, the fall conference, which you've participated in, is our flagship event. We're going to have a virtual version of that in January, so please, everybody, keep their eyes open for that. It's not a substitute for being together, which is in a funny way a point about embodiment, but it will at least try to sustain the intellectual community that we have built up over the years. We're the primary engine of Notre Dame's institutional commitment to building a culture of life. We obviously do student formation. We have 300 undergraduate fellows and graduate student fellows of our center. We call them Soren Fellows, named for the founder of the University of Notre Dame. And then finally, we have a mission stewardship program where we support the university's commitment to hiring those elite faculty members and teachers who are passionate about our distinctive Catholic mission, including the CSC priests who are in studies and we hope will eventually teach and be part of our community at Notre Dame University, at the University of Notre Dame also. So what we aim to do through all of these different endeavors is to share the richness of the Catholic moral and intellectual tradition and to project Notre Dame's voice into the global public square in the name of authentic freedom, human dignity, the common good, and a culture of life.
Well, it's been an honor to have you on the show. O. Carter Snead, director of the De Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture, professor of law, concurrent professor of political science, and as we've been talking about today, his wonderful book, What It Means to Be Human, The Case for the Body in Public Bioethics. I can't recommend it enough. Please go find it wherever you find books. Carter, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. You guys take care.
So, Bud, I got to say, sometimes you throw out into the wind ideas about people you'd like to have on the show, and then God decides the best time to do it. And I think that is a great way to describe what we were able to talk about today.
No doubt. I mean, it really, to me, Bo, was kind of a spark for this conversation around what the Center for Human Flourishing will look like at Mercy College. So, and it's something exciting to look for in 2021.
Yeah, if you see all of a sudden a bunch of book orders from Iowa, maybe we'll make him sign the books, and then that'll make them embodied, right, Bud? You put the pen to paper, the ink bleeds into the page. That's embodiment.
You got my wheels turning now. We'll have to think of like a special sort of distribution for Iowa listeners.
That's right. But yeah, so the book one more time, What It Means to Be Human, The Case for the Body in Public Bioethics. And if you go onto YouTube and look up the Center for Ethics and Culture at Notre Dame, they have a lot of their conferences in there. You might even see your friend Bo giving a talk if you look hard enough. This is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, our family, our city, our state, our nation, the world, the solar system, the galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week. But if folks want to keep up with our prayer life here on Iowa Catholic Radio, what are ways they can do so?
Yeah, we invite you to join us daily for prayer. We pray the rosary together on air at 5:30 a.m., 9:30 a.m., and 9:30 p.m. We also set aside time at 6 in the morning to pray the Angelus, but all of those prayer opportunities, Bo, are available 24/7, 365 on the Iowa Catholic Radio app. And
folks, if you want to keep up, like I said, with what we're doing, You can do that on the website, all of our social media. But we want to say thank you for being a part of the ministry of Iowa Catholic Radio. It's important to point out that this is not just the people on air. It's not even the good people behind the boards like Jimmy and Deacon Tony or all the people in the office doing the good work. You are a part of Iowa Catholic Radio the minute that you listen, the minute that you give your time to hear what we're up to. But also, of course, we're supported by your prayers, like Bud was just talking about, by your volunteer opportunities. But certainly we have been supported for a long time via the donations that you have been willing to give. By your material support, we are able to keep this ministry going 24/7, as we've said. Radio penetrates walls. It's there when people need it. Radio has a very unique function in all of modern social media that allows people to access these truths when they're ready for them, when they're driving down the road on podcasts, ready to wait for them. So we want to say thank you for your prayers, your volunteering. But if you find it so moved in your heart, especially here before the end of the year, we would love your donations as well. You can do that by calling 515-223-1150. That's the station. You can text them to let them know you're interested. On iowacatholicradio.com, we have the donation button, and then also on the Iowa Catholic Radio app you can download. Bud, God bless my friend. I hope that everything's going well, that your Advent is wrapping up good, and that everything's heading full steam ahead to Christmas joy.
Yeah, this last Sunday, I always welcome Gaudete Sunday, see the rose vestments, some sort of a foreshadowing of the joy of Christmas. But I know we've got one more to go. I do wish everyone a blessed remainder to their Advent and a very joyous Christmas for sure.
I'll make sure to get you a plaque that says Dr. Dean for Christmas. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.